Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Newsfist tonight. A slightly different kind of little thing. I don't usually do sort of commentary on debates and stuff, but this little clip came across my timeline, and I just had to share it with you all. Yes, the retardation from Vaush here, I guess the father of modern leftism, a more sort of chunky version of Vladimir Lenin, or at least aspiring to be, has truly dropped the big think. Watch an incredible display of leftism as Vaush essentially tries to argue that water does not exist. And the reason, of course, I decided to showcase this clip is that it essentially illustrates a leftist technique that is extremely common, which is the focusing on edge cases to the exclusion of everything else. And we see this very clearly. The actual debate is about the trans thing is gender and sex, like binary, all this kind of like stuff that the entire West has basically been driving itself crazy with for the past, oh my god, how long's it been? It seems like a lifetime, but it's probably only like a few years, because at the end of the day, this is how the left works. You find an edge case for any one thing. Doesn't matter like whether 99.9% of the time it's X and Y. If you can just find a few cases where that is broken, you focus on that to the exclusion of all else, and then you use that as a critical method to break down all categories and invalidate any kind of scientific measurement, any kind of categorization, really. And through destabilizing this categorization, you basically make people insane. Because the way humans work when they're observing the world is that they use heuristics, rubrics, stereotypes, shorthands, right, to make sense of reality. And if you corrupt this ability in people by making sure that they can't talk about gender, sex, race, any of these kinds of collective, fuzzy at the edges, but quite solid in the middle concepts, you drive everyone insane. And this is an excellent example of what I'm talking about. Let's watch.
So let's go through some of the things you said. You said all of these views are incoherent. You said there's no coherent concept of gender. Is that right? Did I get you right there?
You will not find me a definition of gender that is 100% consistent and all-encompassing and has no flaws in it. There are no such things. It can't be found.
So there's no consistent definition of gender. So no matter who I asked, if I asked anybody, what is a woman, no matter what they say, you think there's going to be some sort of impossibility or contradiction or inconsistency.
You will always be able to find a hole or an exception. Whether they take a biological or a self-ID, a social role, or an abolitionist perspective, there will...
And this is how it goes, basically. In the search for a unifying ideology that is always correct at all times and all places, a totalizing or totalitarian ideology, anything that is out of place, anything that cannot be explained by the sort of broad understanding that most people have, becomes a target for attack. And thus we have a case where instead of, say sexual freaks of nature, intersex people and stuff like that, who do exist, being relegated to a minor area of study among certain academics that look at specific edge cases, perhaps an apartment in some university, they must be brought front and center as a way to delegitimize the understanding that normal people have, that everyone has the categorization that everyone has that allows them to go through life.
Always be. Well, gender abolition is a prescription, not a description of current gender states. But no matter what a person's definition of a woman is, there is always going to be something you can pin them on.
Okay, so then it sounds like your view entails there are no women, because there's no true definition of woman.
No, not at all. There are plenty of social constructions that I think have meaning and serve utility, even if there are no consistencies to it. I think cool people exist, but I don't think I could ever find a single definition of cool that is perfectly delineates in all categories and situations between cool and uncool people.
Okay, so you said the concepts are incoherent and inconsistent, but I think what you just mean is perhaps vague, so allow for borderline cases, or difficult to articulate. I think maybe that's what you mean when you say all definitions are incoherent and inconsistent, all definitions of gender anyway. I think what you mean is they allow for borderline cases. They'll be vague in various ways. And what was the second thing I said? Vague in various ways and hard to articulate, difficult to articulate. It'll be hard to come up with or express or verbalize a definition that includes everyone who should be included and excludes everyone who should be excluded. So that's the view. I guess I would agree with that. Yeah, definitions are hard to come by, typically. And most of them, especially in biology, are vague and admit of borderline cases. But nevertheless, they may be true. There may be true definitions, even if they're difficult to express or articulate. You gave the example, one of your arguments against the biological definition of woman was that we didn't know about chromosomes many years ago. Well, first of all, I don't think biological sex is defined in terms of chromosomes. But let's just use the example of water. Maybe we could agree that water is H2O. That was true even before we knew about chemistry. That was the definition of water before anybody knew anything about chemistry, before we knew about H2O. Back when Aristotle thought water was just an element. Nevertheless, it was
This
H2O.
isn't true.
I'm sorry?
This isn't true.
And here Vaush begins to get into the essentially social constructivist angle of his argument. See, in the minds of people like Vaush and the other lefties, there is essentially no objective reality, right? They don't really believe in positivism. I don't know how it is that they maintain such an outlook, but it does explain a lot of the kind of aberrations that we are seeing from the left these days. The idea of your truth, for example, right? So this is a reaction to an idea that was popular in modernity that was called positivism. Positivism is the idea, basically, that most people fundamentally ascribe to, at least in the modern West, or they used to, that there is an objective reality out there, right? Perception of it may be imperfect. Our ability to describe it may be imperfect, but it is out there, and with science and observation, we can discover what it is, right? So it comes from the first premise that, as Dr. Bogardus, I can't pronounce that name, was saying, is that water was always H2O. It was always 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. We just did not realize that until we described it. I guess in Vaush's world, up until the point when humans described it and had a name for it, it didn't exist. And I think this is at the fundamental root of why a lot of the left is so crazy and why they tend towards communism as well. Because in their mind, everything about humanity is socially constructed. Therefore, the only reason why humans do bad things is because society is constructed in a way that makes them do bad things. There is no sort of innate humanity, which is why they always wind up trying to create the new Soviet man, because they believe that if they can simply alter social conditions enough, the inner self will change. Those of us who have studied history or have a brain realize that human beings have a biological component. Yes, they can certainly be psychologically influenced in many ways, but there are certain biological things that you simply cannot overcome, like the drive to eliminate hate. You may as well try and eliminate pooping. It's not going to happen. It's a fundamental biological function, a biological emotional function. All you're going to do is just make people suppress it, and they will take out their hatred in other ways. Of course, the more cynical among us might believe that there are a certain group of leftists who are well aware of this and merely wish to channel negative emotions such as hatred, envy, etc. towards pre-approved targets that they select. I am unsure about whether such people really are stupid enough to believe that the entirety of humanity is socially constructed. They certainly act as though that's what they believe. I mean, I don't know. Is there like a small group of smarter leftists puppeting the idiots like idiot puppets? I don't know. Anyway, let's continue.
That water has not always been H2O?
Yeah, all you have to do is cross the Mexican border. And over there, it's aqua. That's H2O, not water.
And see, this just demonstrates exactly what I mean. Vaush thinks that when you are describing water, right, you are describing the word that people give to water. In other words, he is like a man who has a map, and he is confusing the map for the actual ground that he is walking on. And in a sort of weird magical thinking, he believes that if he puts a mark on the map, then a mark will magically appear on the ground. This is not the case. The map is merely a representation for the reality on the ground. The map is not the territory, is the way that is usually described.
Aqua means water. Aqua is water.
It's a different term.
Actually, it's agua. It's not aqua, right?
And we're referring to terms and definitions here.
No, I'm referring to water, the stuff that fills lakes and rivers. I'm not talking about the word one.
Many things fill lakes and rivers.
Okay. Do you...
Now, see, again, this is this rhetorical trick, right? I'm talking about water, which fills lakes and rivers. Oh, many things fill lakes and rivers. So it's always, again, this rhetorical move where any statement that is expressed, you find an exception or an edge case, and then use that to prove that, broadly speaking, the statement is untrue, despite the fact that basically everyone who isn't a rabid leftist, if you said water is what fills lakes and rivers, they would understand exactly what you mean. I presume if he had said water is the stuff that falls from the sky, he would have been like, well, planes sometimes fall from the sky. Yes, but that's not what we're talking about. This way of viewing the world is essentially a corrosive substance that destroys all human categorization of thought, which is why people start going crazy. Because without the ability to make basic distinctions between things, everyone loses their mind. I mean, I wonder if Vaush, actually really behaves like this in real life. I mean, when he's walking down the street, is he paralyzed about whether the pavement is really a pavement or whether it is something else? You know what I mean? If he goes up to a traffic light, is he, oh my God, is this a traffic light? Is this something else? Of course not, right? Because humans in the world, right, they make approximations, categorizations. It is the fundamental way that humans operate. And simply saying things like, oh, well, I can't trust whether this traffic light will work because sometimes it doesn't work, may be true, but it's also completely retarded.
Do you honestly not know what I mean when I talk about water, or are you just being a little difficult?
I think you made a mistake before you began that argument, which is that you said just because people didn't always know something doesn't mean that it can't be true. But that can't be the case when we're talking about definitions. Things that are true have constructed premises that lead necessarily to an outcome, a resolution, but a definition is something applied presuppositionally. You can say, for example, that the light, the spectrum of light that we see, the visible spectrum of light, is something that exists outside of our perception, and that is certainly true. But how we perceive it is not existentially correct. And what's more, the definition between red, orange, and yellow is not something that you can find proven anywhere. And
again, right? You ask someone, well, is this red? Is this blue? Or is this red and is this orange, right? And they make the case, well, you can't exactly tell. There is a color between red and orange. Therefore, these categorizations are meaningless. You see how this trick works. You just literally apply it to everything until people lose their goddamn mind.
In the real world, we have to arrive at arbitrary distinctions. So that's.
Can I just ask you about water again? Do you not think water is H2O?
But I think we've come up with a term to describe what we refer to as water. There are, of course, other cultures.
I agree with you. We came up with a term to talk about water, and that term is water. And we came up with terms to talk about hydrogen and oxygen. But here's a sentence. Water is H2O. You know what those terms mean. Now think about what idea is expressed by the words. What's the thought that's expressed? We could express it in many different languages. Now think about the thought that's expressed by that sentence. That's true, isn't it? The thought that is expressed by the sentences. Water is H2O.
What do you think?
And it was long before we got here, long before humans got here. Water has always been H2O.
Well, ice, of course, is also H2O, but water Water is
It
what
is.
we define it as within a given, state.
Ice is also water. It's not liquid water.
Yeah,
It's
but
solid water.
colloquially, people refer to ice as ice and water as water.
Yes.
And again, right, the just stupid edge casing, over and over again. Ice and water are two different words. Just because they're made of the same stuff, everyone understands that ice melts into water. This is just sheer obscurantism. It's just obscuring the point in order to make people crazy.
Whether or not they're going to use either of those definitions is going to come down to context. And what about heavy water, 2H2O, or deuterium oxide, which is referred to as water and is in fact a type of water, an isotope, but is not in fact H2O. There's an extra hydrogen atom holding on there, making the substance denser.
Right. And the amount of deuterium in the water is some fraction of a percent. Deuterium is very, very rare. You've got to specifically gather it. So once again, you take a thing that is extremely, extremely rare, right? And then you use that to bash the basic definition that everyone uses and understands. Thus, you undermine language completely, and sooner or later, no one has any idea what the fuck they are talking about. No one can communicate because some leftists can always come along and say, oh, but what about this thing? And you are seeing this very, very clearly with the trans debate.
So if this is taking me back to chemistry class, but did you say deuterium? Is that right? Is that heavy water?
Yes.
If that's just an isotope, is it an isotope of oxygen that makes that? If that's an isotope, it's still oxygen and it's still H2O, and that is still H2O. That's still water. That's why
a different chemical compound than water. Certainly, if people wanted to refer to it as a different type of thing, not water, but let's say they chose the term waterium. I don't know. Scientists come up with wacky names. If they wanted to come up with a term like that to describe it, they would have a significant taxonomical distinction to refer to, a different molecular composition, but we refer to it as water. You might say it's trans water. A bit of a difference, but fundamentally very similar.
Trans water. And there you go. Again, it's the same thing. It's basically water, but it's an edge case, so we have to, invent like a new word and, say that, not all water is the same. Not all women, can give birth. Not all women have uteruses. Some women have penises, and you use that gap to like force it open and just fuck everything up.
Okay. So you're resisting me on the claim that water is H2O. Let me try a different one.
I'm resisting you on definitional prescriptivism. I think that we have...
I'm not prescribing any definitions. I'm just saying water is H2O, true or false. And it sounds like you're reluctant to say true.
No,
so
I agree. I agree that water... we refer to H2O as water, colloquially. Yeah, of course. I'm fine with that.
So water is H2O. Yeah. And it was H2O long before humans came along. Another example.
Water wasn't a concept back then.
I know, but nevertheless, water was there. Actually, water's never been a concept. Water's always been a molecule. We have a concept of water, but the concept is not itself water.
But our understanding of it and the differentiations that we make when we distinguish it from things like heavy water, these are socially constructed. After all, you just said it's still fundamentally water, but we're talking about a different molecular shape. Now, that's because you've arbitrarily branch these two within a category because there's a relationship between them.
Yeah, and it just goes on like that. If you want to watch the rest of this head mess, I don't recommend it unless you want to feel like someone is stabbing a screwdriver into your ear and messing around with your brain. You absolutely can. But I just wanted to highlight to you, right, the way this works. So the next time you are trying to make a accurate observation about reality that regards some kind of generalization, because everything does, and someone comes along and says, oh, but that is a generalization, you should basically say, yes, it is a correct generalization, and it is the truth. And you are merely trying to distract us by talking about the edge cases of the generalization and ignoring the central point of truth about that generalization. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, please leave a comment. What did you think? Do you think this is retarded, or do you think Vaush has a point? Leave comments, all that kind of stuff. if you're watching on Odyssey, you can support me by clicking the support button and send me some library coins. If you have an Odyssey account, you will automatically get them for watching stuff. So send them to me. It will help the video do well and all that kind of stuff. And I will see you soon. Good night.